this is unconstitutional and you need to remove it. We didn't hear anything. Shocking. But then Nick had heard a rumor that it had been removed, and we wanted to get a picture of that and just ensure that that actually happened. But we were unable to do that, so we thought, well, what we're going to do is write to the city and thank them for taking corrective action, and just ask them to, write back and just confirm that it has indeed been removed. And so our dear friend Sandy wrote back to us, so I'll just read it to you, but it said, this memorial has been removed and will not be reinstalled. It was decided that the legal costs of standing up for our community were way too onerous for the taxpayers, and in spite of the community's wishes, we have capitulated to your bullying. So, that was fun. I am a bully. Another thing that we took in Livingston County was In God We Trust on patrol cars. And actually, our complainant in this case had contacted us saying that In God We Trust is on the patrol cars. It's new. Is there anything that we can do? And this is actually something that's happening across the country with Black Lives Matter and some of the police shootings that have happened in Dallas and other places. Sheriff's offices are doing this because for some reason they think putting In God We Trust on their vehicles is going to keep them safe. And that's what they tell us. This is just a safety measure that we're doing for our officers. Yeah, I know. But In God We Trust is actually very difficult to challenge. It's the national motto, and courts have found it to be just this non-religious statement. It's just ceremonial deism. It doesn't mean anything religious. So it's difficult to attack. We'd like to do it, especially in this type of context. In order to do that, though, we need to have a sheriff or a sheriff's deputy who is willing to go against his department and sue over this. So I'm not sure how likely that is to happen, although we have had some officers contact us about it. But then when they raise it up to their superiors, they allow them to take it off their particular patrol car. So there's small victories there. But when our complainant was communicating with Livingston County's Sheriff's Office, the undersheriff, who was writing back to tell him we're not taking this off, had John 15:13 in his email signature. Which says, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. So he complained about that and wasn't getting anywhere, so we had contacted the county as well. And we got an email back where they said, I have been advised by the sheriff to remove John 15:13 from my signature. But just to stick it to us, In God We Trust will not be removed. So, it was a partial victory, but a victory nonetheless. And then we deal with post office complaints. Post office complaints are really fun because they're strange, and also because the postal regulations, I'm sure you've never read them, they're really voluminous. There's so many, but they are really strict on what can be on postal property, what can be displayed, what can be just who can stand there, that type of thing. So we've had victories where a particular employee has a cross at the customer counter that we've been able to get off, nativity scenes at post offices. Even the Salvation Army bell ringers, if they're on postal property, they have to move. They're not allowed to be there according to the postal regulations. So this was one from Davisburg, Michigan, where the post office was handing out these coloring sheets. And you'll probably notice that it's not just a bunny. In the background, it says Happy Easter, and there are 3 crucifixes in the background. And then somebody not only printed this off, but then affixed the U.S. Postal Service logo to the coloring page, which is also incredibly problematic for the post office. So we wrote to the postmaster and they did remove it. This is the response that we received. It says, the postmaster has apologized for mistakenly violating postal regulations. All postal facilities have been alerted and requested to discontinue the distribution and to destroy all remaining Easter coloring pictures. And then in a polite turn of events, they wrote at the end, we appreciate you reporting this matter to us. It helps to know these kinds of issues that may have been overlooked so we can work towards improvements. So they're not all mean. And at FFRF, one of our biggest area of complaints is religion in the schools. As you all know, the law is very good in that regard. We deal with praying coaches, praying teachers, a lot of different variations of religion in the public schools despite that case law. You guys all know the school cannot sponsor prayers. That's been the law since the 1960s, and public school employees can't even participate in those types of prayers. But students can pray on their own, but it has to be student initiated. And so when we take on complaints, it's because we're getting a coach who's praying with his team, or a teacher who's leading her students in prayer, or they've asked the student to do that. That's also illegal. So this is one of my favorite complaints to handle, not just because the law is so good, but because our victories directly affect a really vulnerable population. And any time that I can make a child feel less isolated and less alone because of their lack of beliefs, I feel like I've done some good in the world. So this picture is of Millington Community Schools in Michigan. They hosted Detroit Central High School. And at the end of the game, I don't know who won, but at the end of the game, Detroit Central High School invited Millington to come to the center of the field, the 50-yard line, and do a prayer. The coaches were the one who extended that invitation and then led the prayer. And so you can kind of see them in the background holding hands in the prayer circle. So we wrote to both schools, and they agreed that this was a violation of the Constitution and directed their coaches to refrain from doing that in the future. And we've gotten victories like this in many different school districts across Michigan. Just to name a few, Bay City Public Schools and Midland Public Schools, it was the same type of situation. One of the teams asked the other team to join them at the 50-yard line and engage in a prayer. When we write to the school districts, we're pretty successful in getting them stopped. But coaches obviously aren't the only offenders. Teachers can be as well. Last year we wrote to Brighton Public Schools after we heard that there was a prayer at the 8th grade dinner dance. The dinner portion of the evening was happening, and one of the teachers said it would be a good idea for you to all pray before you started eating. And so one of the students contacted us, and we wrote a letter, and she was reprimanded for her behavior there as well. And then prayer comes up all of the time in different ways. And one of them is assemblies. And in Delton Kellogg schools in Michigan, we handled a complaint over a Veterans Day assembly, where it was a mandatory assembly, and they brought in veterans from the community to talk about their experiences to the students. So it's actually a really laudable goal. Like, it's a good educational thing to have veterans come in and talk about their experiences to students. But because it was Veterans Day, they decided to hold a prayer before the assembly, and we wrote to them to let them know that that was also illegal. And also, we like to point out that 25% of FFRF's membership is active military or veterans. So really, when you're having prayer or Christian crosses at these memorials and these assemblies, you're really alienating these veterans who don't believe. So, and of course, there's always something new under the sun. I've been working at FFRF for 10 years, and one of the things that I tell some of our interns and fellows is that I'm always learning something new, some new creative way to violate the Constitution. One, just last week, we heard about a school in Texas where they buried the Bible under the entrance of the door to the school, and then put a plaque up that says, underneath this brick lays the Holy Bible. I've never heard of that before. I don't know why they did that, but we are fighting to get that removed as well. They're going to have to dig up the entrance.
Why would you bury a book?
I have no idea. Probably because they know they couldn't actually display it. So if it's underground, you can't see it. But we'll put a plaque up so everybody knows it's there. But anyway, so Portage Public Schools decided to have their kindergarten readiness screening at First Baptist Church in Portage, which is pretty common. You know, sometimes when there are situations where you're going to have a lot of people, schools will, like graduation, schools will go to churches because they have the space to accommodate those people. But there can be abuses in those situations as well. So you do still have to be pretty vigilant. There's a lot of religious iconography, obviously, in churches that students are subjected to. So there's a lot of different things to look at. But at this kindergarten screening, the church handed out goodie bags to all of the incoming kindergarten students, which include proselytizing literature and information about when their next services would be. And then the coup de grace was the pencil that they gave to all of the students. It said, "God made me special." So I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and pencils are a big deal. So I can only imagine what our complainant had to do to get that pencil away from their kid, because my kids wouldn't give it up. It would have to be conveniently lost to do that. So we did write to the school district and told them this was a bad decision and alerted them to everything that was happening there. And the school district wrote back and said, "Yep, you're right. Sorry that we did that. That was a big mistake, and nobody should have gotten the goodie bags. And we're going to look for different venues in the future." So that was a good victory. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the education efforts that we do, because it's not just about filing lawsuits or writing to them telling them that they're violating the Constitution. We want to educate and be proactive. We want to let public officials know what the law is before they violate the Constitution. So we have written proactive letters to superintendents across states about prayer in schools, and we've written to legislators about the changing demographics and things like that. And we have now a rapid response team at FFRF, which engages in lobbying, and that's just ramped up in the last year. So Andrew Seidel on staff is leading up that effort, and I, because of my background on Capitol Hill, have been sort of helping and guiding him in that. And we've been out to DC a number of times over the last year, lobbying your legislators in Congress about state church issues. We actually had quite a few meetings with John Conyers, who was unfortunately not there, but was a good state church advocate while he was there. But chances are somebody in our office has talked to one of your representatives. Also last year, our response team contacted the governor about the initiative for the Choose Life license plate here in Michigan that was vetoed. So those are the types of things that we're doing to also just help educate the public on what our issues are and what the law is and what the law should be. Another part is to just educate the public in general. Like I said earlier, we want to remind Americans about our heritage of keeping religion out of government and why that's important to us. And so one of the things that we've tasked Andrew with is also writing letters to the editor and opinion pieces. When we complain about an issue and the community has an uproar, we want them to understand why we're doing what we're doing. We're not just mean people. We actually have a pretty laudable goal. And so when we complained about the Père Marquette cross and all of the community uprising was happening, and they got the offer from the ACLJ to have pro bono representation, Andrew wrote a letter that was published by the Religious News Service talking about how dangerous it is to take them up on those offers because they're not really as good as they seem. It's pro bono if you win. If you lose, you're still paying tens of thousands of dollars to organizations like ours. We've gotten $100,000 to $200,000 in attorney's fees from these pro bono services. So that's what Andrew wrote to let the community know, because it is a really good offer. You know, if you want that religious symbol on government property and this guy is telling you, I'll represent you for free, that sounds great. But they don't know the retainer agreement. They don't know what the attorneys are actually going to be paying for. So this is just a glimpse of what we've been doing in Michigan over the past few years. Obviously, there's going to be more to come. The crosses are probably going to go to litigation at some point this year. And Michigan has, in previous years, been pretty active thanks to groups like yours. And we are going to continue to fight and make sure that the Christian right doesn't trump reason or our First Amendment. We're going to be working overtime to safeguard your constitutional rights and to keep in place that ability to be free from the imposition of religion. Today's theme is the secular family, so I just want to take a minute to talk about that because, as you all know, the secular family is growing, and Freedom from Religion Foundation and American Atheists and groups like that have helped contribute to that. When I started at FFRF in 2008, I would talk to complainants and they would say, I'm the only atheist in my community. There's nobody else here who is like-minded. And now, when I talk to complainants on the phone 10 years later, if they say that, I can honestly say that's actually not true because I just talked to 2 other people from your community about the same issue last week. So the numbers are growing, people are being out, and it's wonderful. And of course, there's always strength in numbers. So thank you very much.
When there's a dispute, with the nativity scene, and there's that property transfer, how does that work?
So usually what happens is, what should happen is the government has a process by which they can dispose property. It's usually written into their ordinances. So they will usually have to put the property up for bidding, sell it to everybody. But what we've seen happen in practice is that they already know who the buyer is going to be. So it's usually some sort of religious organization that's going to take over. And it can just be like that 1 acre that the religious display is on. And then we'll ask them, if they do engage in the transfer, it is technically a win because it's no longer on public property. But we're going to ask them to demarcate it in some way to show that it's not government property anymore. So putting up a fence, putting up disclaimers and things like that. That's not what we want to happen. We would like them just to remove it. I worked on a case in Manitowoc County in Wisconsin where they had a nativity scene on a courthouse lawn after we sued, and they created this public forum. During the course of litigation, they actually spanned several years. During December, they moved the nativity from the courthouse lawn to the church across the street. So then, even though we technically lost that case because they had this public forum, they decided after the case was decided that they were just going to keep the nativity scene at the church because it looked better there. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, usually with nativity scenes, they don't do land transfers. What they'll usually do is they'll create this public forum where anybody can put up a display, or they will just add a bunch of secular objects to it. So we usually see the land transfers in cross displays or Ten Commandments displays.
I came across a headline where a satanic temple woman said that anti-abortion laws are against her religion. What do you think of the satanic temple line of argument?
They're very creative. Certainly, I've seen the stories on that. I don't know the details of the case or anything like that, but they are definitely a very creative organization. They've been really helpful in these public forum situations where there is a display or a literature distribution in schools that are happening by religious organizations. And when we go in to also ask for that equal time, they'll come in too. And usually, especially in school situations, when the Satanic Temple is coming to like hand out coloring books, it shuts the forum down right away. So they're really helpful. I'm not exactly sure how that particular case is going to go, because if it violates her religious beliefs, then she's going to be asserting free exercise claims, which FFRF doesn't handle. It gets pretty convoluted because there's also the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that we've seen across the country, and we believe that that act is unconstitutional. So we're really leery of making those types of claims because we want the overall statute to be declared unconstitutional. But they're a separate organization, and I do think that they do good work, and they're really a creative legal team over there.
Hello, I'm particularly interested in the Sackrider Hill cross. I was born and raised 2 miles from that cross.
Oh.
And I have been for the last 3 weeks seen my relatives on Facebook screaming about these nasty people coming after their cross. Is there anything we can do to support freedom from religion? I mean, we have family, we're Michigan, we can talk about the cross, it is public land. What can we do as a community to support you that cross needs to come down?
But I think just generally what you can do is the same types of things that Andrew is doing in our office, showing up at town hall meetings and registering dissent, letting them know that there is a group of people who don't agree that the cross should be there, and writing letters to the editor so that we have that opposition voice out there, because so often they're only hearing from the religious constituencies, and they really do need to hear from us too, to let them know that there is pressure from the other side and it's not this unanimous majority rules situation. So I would encourage you guys to do that. Go to town halls, start writing letters to the editor and opinion pieces, and then contacting the state DNR and saying that this is wrong. The other thing that you can do, because it is a permit use situation, you could try to have an event at the cross and see if they allow you to do that. I don't know what you do there, but you could have a picnic or something. But I think right now just vocal opposition is really important, because elected officials will heed to the voices of their constituencies. We're seeing that across the board with people who are upset about stuff that Trump is doing across the country. So don't stay silent anymore.
Question, on those land transfer situations, does the city entity actually make the bidding process open and fair? And do secular organizations or people ever come in and swoop up the property and just take down the cross?
They haven't. Yeah, they have in the past, and there have been situations where FFRF has offered to buy the cross or the property, and of course we've never been given the opportunity to do that. They find some other way. There's always some way to deny our bid. Even if we're offering more money, then they're like, well, we want a local group to buy the property or something like that. But it's really specific to the cities. So when this happens, we have to do a lot of research to figure out what that process is. What I told you was really general, but ordinances can get pretty specific on what the city needs to do in order to dispose of that property. And so it really kind of depends on where we're fighting this battle.
Hello.
Hi.
My question's about parades. I've noticed when we take our daughter to parades, 4th of July parade, Memorial Day parade, things like that, I would assume are paid for with city taxes, that there's always candy and the kids are loving that. She comes home with a bag full of candy, and most of it, a lot of it, is religious advertising, come to our church, or there's a pencil with, God made me special on it, or something like that, or they'll have, a pamphlet that says, join us for free hot dogs and pop at, whatever Presbyterian church after the parade. And I've never seen anything that's secular in that mix. How is that okay?
Sure. So parades are going to be treated like a public forum. The parades are open to any group or individual that wants to participate. And so long as they allow you anybody to participate, they have to allow everybody to participate. So the religious organizations have to be part of that. So one of the ways that you could combat that is by getting your secular organization to jump into the parade and hand out things.
Yeah, and that's what I thought. I've never seen any non-religious organization do it though.
Right,
At
right.
least in Norfolk, I don't know.
I think you have a goal for next year.
Hi, first of all, thank you very much. This is a very, very fascinating discussion.
Oh, good.
But I have a question that has two parts. First part is the Declaration of Independence makes reference to a creator which endows us with the inalienable rights. Is there a risk that complete obliteration of inviolable trust would obliterate those rights? That's the first part of the question. And what are your thoughts on that? You mentioned the creator. The second part, I imagine a lot of religious people would see the veterans and the cross as innocent. What would you say, just so I can have a good response, is the danger of all having this mixing of church and state?
Sure. So, to your first question, the Declaration of Independence does reference a creator. The thing to remember about the Declaration of Independence is it's not a governing document. Our Constitution is what governs the United States, and that document is entirely godless. There's only 2 references to religion in the Constitution, and both of those are exclusionary, in the First Amendment and in Article 6, saying there should be no religious test for office. And there's also history and debates about what creator meant in the Declaration when they wrote that. Were they talking about a God, or were they just talking about the universe and things like that? But I think the big thing, at least for me being an attorney, to focus on is that the Declaration of Independence is an important document in our founding, but it's not the governing document in our founding. There were many iterations of governing documents before we got to our current Constitution. So it's important historical document, but for the purposes of the First Amendment, it has no relevance. When you're talking to your friends about, a cross, it's kind of innocent, there are a lot of people who do think that a cross is just a symbol of death. But I think what the retort is that it's not a generic symbol of death, because Jews are not going to put a cross on their grave, and neither would you, presumably. Usually also when you see a cross, the first thing that you think of is Christianity. It's just this really powerful symbol. It needs to be removed because it really does create this exclusion of a great portion of the population. And it also perpetuates this myth that America is a Christian nation. So for inclusivity and to dispel that myth, we need to keep those types of symbols off of government property.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.